Alright, so this is our first week of a brand new series called My Friend is Struggling With. Why do we call it that? Because unfortunately there is a huge stigma on any type of mental health issues, right? We all have an opinion about it. Most of our opinions are very ignorant, most of them are very uneducated, and aren't based on any experience. And a lot of the opinions that we've heard from people who are older and supposed to be smarter and wiser than us, let's be honest, they're garbage. And they're not based in any real facts. They're just based, again, in opinion. So the next 3 weeks, we're going to cover some important truths about people that suffer with mental illness. And I want to say this up front, just to get this out of the way, and I'll probably repeat this every single time we're here. The church, when I mean Winbrook, I mean like the big C, big church. We have not always done a very good job of understanding mental illness, or really even trying to. We've done a pretty poor job, actually. The way it's been viewed and approached within the church has often pushed a lot of people deeper into hiding, deeper into their own suffering and darkness, and more often than not, into isolation and feeling like they're all alone. So over the next few weeks, we're going to look at what mental illness really is, how we can reach through our own darkness if we're the ones suffering, and how we can love those who are in a way that represents Christ well. I really just have one main point. I don't have three, I don't have four, just one main thing, and I'm going to give it to you right now. Right up front so that you're aware of it. I want you to know that struggling with mental illness is not a sin. Period. Struggling with any sort of mental illness is not a sin at all. That's not my opinion. That's a biblical position that I'm going to back up tonight. So I want you to know that up front. In case you've wrestled with that, in case you felt shame or guilt over your struggle at any point, right up front, it is not a sin. Maybe you've heard a Christian or even a pastor tell you that it is. But I want you to hear me as clearly as you've ever heard anything I've said tonight when I tell you it is not. Period. For the purposes of this series, we're going to mainly focus on anxiety and depression. That's not to say that other mental illnesses aren't important. It's not to say that they're less important than these, but if we look at the Health and Human Services reports that come out yearly, they would say that these are the two most common types, especially in your demographic, in your age group. It's much more likely that we have people in this room who suffer with one of these two particular illnesses than any of the others. In fact, a report last year said 1 in 5 teenagers struggle with depression. We have more than 5 people in this room. It says 1 in 8 teenagers suffer with anxiety. That means statistically speaking, there are more likely people in this room who are currently struggling with one or both of these issues. And if you aren't, I'm willing to bet that you know somebody who is. A lot of people who are. Now, whether you have depression, anxiety, or any other form of mental illness, the truths that we cover in this series still apply to you. Before we get into the Bible, I want to explain, though, what depression and anxiety are, and more importantly, what they're not. We're going to use some words that maybe you're not familiar with. Maybe you haven't heard them before tonight, but it's important that you hear them. First, what they're not. Depression is not just feeling sad. And anxiety is not just being worried. We tend to sort of kind of use those words interchangeably in our culture, but they are not the same thing. It wouldn't be accurate to say, hey, this show I watched last week, or this movie I watched, or this song I listened to made me depressed. No, it didn't. It didn't. Maybe it bummed you out, maybe it made you sad, but that's not the same thing as depression. It's also not accurate to say that I'm suffering from anxiety because of this test coming up, or about flying, or about whatever this individual incident is. Sure, you might feel anxious or nervous about what's happening, but that's not the same as experiencing anxiety as a medical condition in your life. Depression and anxiety occur when someone's brain does not produce enough natural neurotransmitters, whether that's norepinephrine or serotonin, and so your chemical imbalance in your brain is off. Everyone's brain produces some form of these chemicals. When you have the proper balance, it's easy to regulate how you feel. It's easy to regulate how you respond to your feelings. both physically and emotionally. But when your brain does not produce enough, you end up with some sort of mental illness. You may have trouble controlling how you feel and your emotions. You might have trouble coping with everyday activities, with difficulty maintaining relationships. You may feel physically ill consistently for no reason whatsoever. You may feel hopeless. For many who suffer from these things, you find that you can't forgive yourself for really, really small mistakes in your life. Really insignificant things to most people, but to you they're not. You tend to start to hate yourself for those things because they don't feel little to you. They feel part of this big picture, this big story that just tells everybody that you're a failure. It's all directly linked to the chemistry in your brain, which you cannot control, nor can you change without help. You're born with the brain that you have. So I think it's important that we all understand this is a very complex issue that we're talking about. This is not a simple thing, and it doesn't have simple answers. So for those of us who don't struggle in this area, we need to be really careful not to try to simplify the issues. Not to make quick judgments and broad statements about these things of people who struggle with them. It's also important to understand that this is something that people are born with or develop over time because of triggers or things that happen in their lives. Because that helps us to answer some of the pressing questions that people who suffer with this have. Am I sinning because I feel depressed? Am I wrong because I feel the way that I feel? Is it some sort of a faithless cop-out that I seek treatment through counseling or medication? We'll go ahead and answer all three of those for you, and the answer is no. It's not a sin that you struggle with depression. Like I said, you're not wrong for the way you feel. The statement I say a lot is you can't control how you feel, but you can control what you do with it. You can allow those feelings to lead you to sin, but your feelings can't be wrong because you can't control the way you feel. And finally, is it a faithless cop-out to seek treatment? Would you say that to somebody wearing glasses? You need to go pray more because you can't see? Would you say that to a diabetic who takes insulin? Well, if you trust Jesus, then just stop. No, we wouldn't say that in any other circumstance. So we're not going to say it here. Psalm 139 says, "For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you, and I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed before you, when as yet there were none of them." So who made you the way that you are? It's not a trick question. Who made you the way that you are? God. I just read it. God. Who knitted you together in your mother's womb? God. Who made your brain the way it is? God. God did. He made you. And He made you on purpose, with a purpose, and for a purpose. When society would have said that you were without any value whatsoever, when society would have said that it would have been legal to terminate your life, when you were just an unformed substance, God saw you, He loved you, and He formed you into exactly what you are right now. He's the one who created you, your brain, and your brain chemistry. Sometimes your depression will tell you that you're worthless, you have no value, but God's never seen you that way. You were worth noticing before you even had a heartbeat to God. You were worth creating, worth forming into exactly who you are. The final product, you, is exactly what He intended to make. He didn't screw up. He didn't make a mistake. He didn't forget to put something in. He made the right person the right way, you. Scientific study has proven that mental illness is caused by brain chemistry. There's something called a causal link. Well, God made your brain and the chemistry in it. Is it possible then that having depression as a result of the brain that God created and gave to you could be sinful. Could God cause you to sin like that? No. James 1 says, "Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial. When he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he's tempted, I'm being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted with evil. He himself tempts no one." God can't tempt people with evil things. God can't cause someone to sin. It's not possible within his nature to do that. His desire for every person in this room is for us to be holy. That we are to pursue a life that is more and more like him, doing the things that please him. So why would he then intentionally cause you to do something to the contrary? He wouldn't. It's not a sin to have mental illness, nor is it a sin to treat it with medicine or counseling. If it were a sin to have it, then it would be actually God's fault that you were sinning. Because that's how he made your brain, and that's not an accusation that I'm willing to stand here and make. One of the primary symptoms of depression is that it can make you feel sad. Randomly and constantly, a deep state of sadness and for no apparent reason whatsoever. This is tough for people without it to understand. Really, really difficult. A lot of people are wired to want to fix things. I'm wired that way. If you come and tell me a problem, it is very hard for me not to then try to tell you exactly what you can do to fix it. That's just the way that my brain chemistry is. A lot of men are that way. A lot of guys are that way. We're fixers. The problem with mental illness is that it causes feelings that can't just be fixed. I really struggled with this for years with Amber. Since Ivy was born, she struggled very mightily at times with depression and anxiety in her life, both of which affected her physical well-being, a lot of her behavior, and her emotional state. And we didn't know for a long time that's what was going on. We knew, obviously, something was happening. It wasn't normal, but for 2 years we had no idea why. And I would be so frustrated. See, I want to fix everything, right? If it's broken, if something is wrong, then that's what I do. But I couldn't. In fact, the more I tried, the worse I made it. And she would be frustrated because I wasn't okay with her not being okay. See, she really just wanted me to be okay with the fact that she wasn't all right, and just to love her that way. That was one of her greatest desires in those times. And the reality is I wasn't trying to tell her that it wasn't okay for her not to be happy. But my constant attempts to drag her out of it, to fix the problem, to make it better, told her exactly that. You know what I've learned? You can ask her, it took me a long time, like years long. One of the most important things I learned, and I hope you remember from tonight, is that sometimes it's okay not to be okay. Sometimes it's all right not to be okay. Ecclesiastes 3 says, "For everything there's a season, a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance." There's a time, there's a season for every single thing that we feel, and it's okay to feel. Sometimes you're going to feel overwhelmingly sad and you're going to need to weep. And weeping is more than crying. Weeping is that sorrowful, bitter, deep inside, powerful type of crying. And it's okay to feel that way sometimes. Sometimes you're going to feel happy and you won't be able to contain yourself and your laughter, and that's okay too. God gives us feelings and emotions that are meant to be felt and not suppressed. See, we always want to rush people from sad to okay, instead of allowing people to feel the things they need to in the process. I think part of that is our genuine desire for them just to be good, to be happy, to be okay. I think a big part of that is our genuine desire not to feel uncomfortable because we don't know what to do. We have to lovingly let people feel what they're feeling. And that doesn't mean just completely avoid them, that they've got some kind of contagious disease. It doesn't mean that they don't want you around them, and that they don't need you in some capacity. It means we should be with them and comfort them, sometimes with just our presence, with our mouth shut. Showing that we love them and we want to be around them when things are good, when things are really bad. What Amber wants most when she struggles with those things is for me not to say anything and just to stand there and hug her. That's what she wants the most. But I'm a fixer, and that was really hard for me to do and understand. But sometimes she doesn't need my mouth. She needs just me to be there. And I think Christians probably struggle with this whole thing a lot more than anybody else. I think part of the struggle is assuming sin on the part of the other person. A couple weeks ago, I read the story about the blind guy, right? Blind from birth. What's the first thing a disciple say? Well, who sinned that he's this way? I think the first thing we do is we have this struggle with assuming that there's sin or something wrong with the other person. I've known Christians who believe that it would be absolutely impossible to be close to God and feel any sort of deep sadness or depression. You wouldn't have to try very hard, honestly, to find a pastor who believes that. Some Christians suppose that if you're close to God, no matter what your circumstance, every second of your life is supposed to be this ridiculous, exuberant amount of joy in your life. Find me anybody that's true about, that they're being honest, and I'll change my stance. I've never seen it. Did you know that Jesus was a man who experienced deep sadness? I'm not saying he had clinical depression, but he absolutely understood what it meant to feel depression at times. Speaking of him before he actually came in Isaiah, it says that the Messiah, who is Jesus, would be a man who was well acquainted with grief. In Isaiah 53, it says, who has believed what he has heard from us? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and as one from whom men hide their faces. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. But we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. Jesus was a man of great sorrow, it says. The original Hebrew word for sorrow here means a mental pain and a debilitating anguish. Jesus felt that. He was acquainted with grief, it says. The word for grief is a sickness or disease characterized by malady or anxiety. Jesus feels or felt the things that we feel. But we know that he never sinned. That means he never did a single thing wrong. Hebrews 4 says that Jesus was tempted in every way that we are, but he never sinned. So if it wasn't a sin for him to feel and experience all of those things, it's not a sin for you. Mental illness is a very difficult condition to live with at times. But you can do it. You can experience it. You can feel everything it wants you to feel, not let it own you or cause you to make bad, sinful decisions. And it will try. We're going to talk more about that in a couple of weeks. But I want you to know now what you're up against. You may think that the only solution is to hurt yourself. It may tell you that you don't need people at all. So you'll be tempted to isolate yourself from people, including the church. And nobody's going to understand you. That if you tell them the truth about what's going on with you, then they're going to make judgments and they won't want to be around you. It'll cause you to isolate. To make you feel like you need to escape by self-medicating with alcohol or substance abuse. And I'll be the first one to tell you from experience, it doesn't work. It only makes it worse. Choosing those paths, that's sinful. Not the disease itself. Since mental illness is not a sin, you don't have to allow it to drive you to sin. There's many people in the Bible who experience this. We see time and time again people who dealt with major depression in different areas of their life. And we watch how it drives them to God and not away from Him. David, in Acts 13, is called a man after God's own heart. That's a statement. A man after God's own heart. But if you spend any time reading the Psalms that David wrote, you would see a guy who is not filled with joy all the time. Yeah, he writes some of the real happy ones. But he writes the saddest Psalms and the most deep sorrow that you'll ever read. But in his deepest times of sorrow and trouble, he always chose to trust God even when he didn't feel it. Psalm 13 says, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me. O Lord my God, light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. And my enemies say I have prevailed over it. Lest my foes rejoice because I'm shaken. But I've trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I'll sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully. Have you ever felt forgotten? I have. Have you ever felt forgotten by God? Have you ever felt like God wasn't even there, or if he was, he just didn't care what you had to say? Like he was hiding from you. You felt sorrow all day long. That's what David is experiencing right here. In his statement, but I've trusted in your love. Even in deep pain, when he didn't feel it, he knew that he could trust God. Even in his deep sorrow, he was able to sing to God because he understood that God's love towards him was still overflowing. And here's the truth. God loves you too. More than you can ever imagine. Maybe you're hurting. Maybe you feel the way that David feels in this psalm, forgotten, abandoned, hurting. But I can promise you that you've not been forgotten. God sees you. He saw you when you were still unformed substance. He hasn't taken his eyes off of these things. He cares about your pain. He's felt your pain. He's not judging you for it. He's not condemning you for it. It's not a sin to feel it. He just loves you exactly how you are. Don't run from him because of hurt. Run to him because of it. Tonight I'm not gonna dismiss you the way I normally do. I'm gonna pray for you. And then I just want you guys to take a few minutes, take some time, kind of talk to God. Tell him how you're feeling. Let him speak back to you. If mental illness is something that you personally deal with, I want you to tell God how you feel. I want you to understand that it is not a sin in any possible way, and remove that. Let him remove that from your vocabulary and your thoughts. Ask God to tell you who you really are. If you don't struggle with this in any way, and everything I'm saying, you're just like, I don't get it. Somebody you know does. Whether you know that they do or not, a lot of people that you come in contact with every single day struggle with you. I want you to ask God how you can be the hands and feet of Christ to those who struggle in this way. How you can speak life and hope into a hopeless situation for somebody else. If you guys have any questions about mental health that we can answer over the next few weeks, I want you to share with each one of your peers. I hate covering this topic because I always feel like I never do it justice. So I want to make sure that we're hearing the questions that you guys have as well.